the Medical AI Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Medical AI Podcast, a 30-minute thrill ride of big ideas. I'm Dr. Felix Beecher and I discuss with scientists, innovators and philosophers. Longevity and immortality is a key theme in the earliest literature. The ancient Epic of Gilgamesh describes the doomed quest for immortality, and in the book of Genesis, Methuselah was supposed to have lived for 969 years. But what does modern science have to offer to life extension? And in particular, has AI added anything new? Well, with me is somebody who is actively involved in this field, Dr. Cory Goldberg. Cory, a very, very warm welcome. Could you introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Felix, thank you so much. I really appreciate being on with you and looking forward to our conversation. My background, I'm a plastic and craniofacial surgeon in Toronto, Canada. I have a background in physiology, and I did a Master of Applied Science in Biomedical Engineering and Stem Cells. And those things kind of gave me a little bit of a foundation after I entered my plastic surgery practice to grow into the area of healthy longevity, I've done a lot of research on reactive oxygen species over the years, and that's certainly a core of aging and the cause of aging. So, I kind of grew into the space, and a couple of years ago I helped co-found a company in the longevity space, so I'm really interested in this both personally and professionally, and looking forward to chatting about it with you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, look, let's lay some groundwork on the subject of longevity, and especially for our younger listeners, could you just summarize what biological changes are involved in aging?
For sure. I think the most important thing for younger listeners to understand is that aging is actually a disease process, and most people tend to think of the components of aging, like heart disease or arthritis, as being aging, but actually aging itself is very measurable. And those biological changes are things that we can observe and potentially change, and that's the foundation of longevity science. So there are quite a few, but some of the most common ones are telomeres. I mean, a lot of people have heard of those. Telomeres are sort of the caps at the end of your DNA strands, and they shorten over a lifetime, and that's something that can be measured. And healthier people, they have longer telomeres. So that's one area. Another genetic or DNA area of interest in aging science is epigenetics, which is the folding of our DNA. So most people know about DNA genes and the sequence that they come in, but actually one of the really important parts of how our DNA functions is the way that it folds up inside the nucleus. And that's what epigenetics is, and epigenetics is how the DNA folds, and that would, for example, make something a skin cell or a kidney cell or a heart cell. And so with aging, the epigenetics actually changes, and our cells start to misfunction, and your skin cell starts to behave a little bit more like a liver cell, and that's a main part of aging. So there's quite a few different dimensions there. These are called the hallmarks of aging, and all of these are biological changes that can actually be measured and followed. One last one, if I could, a very interesting one that's only come to light in the past few years. These cells called senescent cells, and senescent cells are more commonly called zombie cells because they're cells that misfunction, and they actually harm other cells around them and make them become zombie cells too. And this is another marker of aging, and actually it causes us to get older. So zombie cells, I think, are an interesting biological phenomenon in aging as well.
So is this concept of a disease model of aging, is that controversial, or is that a subject of some kind of consensus?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that within the longevity community, it's well established and accepted. I would say as far as public healthcare systems in most countries, they have not yet adopted that model. They still consider aging as a sort of a natural process, as it were, and not something modifiable. And so I would say it's universally accepted amongst the people who are participating in the field. But outside of the field in general medicine, it's not well accepted, and I don't think it's a part of most medical school curricula in any country yet.
Now, some people, of course, are lucky in that they are much less prone to disease than other people, but that doesn't really seem to be the case with aging. Everybody gets old, even the most blessed of us get old, and nobody still looks young now, if they reach 100. So is there some sense in which there is a natural process of fuses burning down, or however you might want to see it?
Yeah, that's a very good way of describing it. The fuse burning down, and so there is absolutely a genetic component to that, and that's the part that's out of our control. And there are those who are blessed with good genetics that will have a tendency to live longer. And in general, those people that have that the very favorable genetics, they are the people who could eat a bad diet or smoke till they're 100 and be fine. And they're sort of balancing off their genetics. But the thing that people fall into, the trap, is the belief that your genetics is like a prison sentence, that it defines you. And if you ask most people how much they think of their aging or their health is related to genetics versus how much is modifiable and environmental, most people would say that they think it's mostly genetic, and actually that's not true at all. The studies in general show that at least 80% of your health and longevity is related to behavior in your environment, and only 20% is related to your genetics. And in fact, there have been studies more recently that say it might be as little as 10%. So more of your health and longevity are in your hands than you would think.
So I'm sure you get asked all the time, Cory, but if somebody asks you tips for staying young for as long as possible, what would you tell them based on the major themes of research in this area?
The first thing I would say to people is focus on the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are 4 pillars of longevity. And those 4 pillars are all behavioral things, and that includes diet, exercise, sleep, and social connectivity. And those very central pillars are the most important part of longevity. And we'll certainly get into discussions about markers and repurposed drugs and all kinds of different things that can be done to modify aging and genetic therapies. But the reality is that the vast majority of your healthy longevity comes down to those 4 very basic pillars. Making sure you have a well-balanced, healthy diet, and I would generally favor a plant-based diet. Exercise, you should get at least 20 minutes of moderate to heavy physical activity every day, and make sure you lift lots of heavy things and keep your muscle mass up, because that is very directly related to your brain function. As far as sleep goes, make sure you get an adequate amount of sleep and that it happens regularly. And social connectivity, honestly, there are so many research documents out that show very clearly the effect of social connection and love on longevity. It is hard to dismiss that, and honestly, the best advice that I have when people ask me is love more, eat less, and move more. And those are the things that you can do to be healthy and stay alive longer.
Now, of all of those recommendations, they seem very sensible and probably uncontroversial, apart from one, and that is what is a good diet, which even now doesn't seem to be there does not seem to be this subject of consensus at all, right? So I mean, there are lots of people proposing Paleolithic diet at the moment, which is very much carnivorous, right? So could you comment on that?
For sure, I'd be happy to. And first off, I would say I come from a biased place where I do follow a largely plant-based diet. I don't call myself vegan because that's a very, very strict set of rules. I would say that I aim to have 98% of my calories come from the ground. And there's a lot of good science behind that, and you can imagine that I make my personal decisions along the lines of what I see in the literature and what I see from the data. And the whole paleo diet, high protein diet thing, your reference earlier to burning a candle, it is a very, very good reference, because in this instance, eating high protein, high animal content diets, it helps you to burn brighter, but it burns faster. That really uses you up. And in particular within animal protein, there are 3 amino acids. Amino acids, for the listeners, are sort of the building blocks of proteins. And again, that'll be something that we reference later. And there are 22 amino acids, and those amino acids make up every single protein on the planet, including everything inside of us. And so there are 3 particular amino acids that are very heavily concentrated in all animal proteins. That includes light meat, dark meat, eggs, dairy, and those actually shut off very important mechanisms that repair your epigenetics. And the epigenetics that we talked about earlier and how your DNA folds. So by affecting those mechanisms, you're actually directly causing yourself to age when you take in that kind of protein.
Interesting. Okay, so before we get on to the subject of AI, which of course is the main part of the podcast, let's talk a little bit more about what the aim of this area is. Now, I can imagine that one aim might be to have the same kind of lifespan but healthier, and another aim might be a longer lifespan, obviously healthier, and another aim, yet even more extreme, might be very, very long lives, like hundreds of years. Can you just talk about where the center of gravity of research is? Where is your interest in that kind of spectrum?
Yeah, I would say that the answer is all of the above. There is definitely research and interest in all of those things. But I think that your description of a life extension with improved health throughout is really the intention. I think the first focus right now is the concept of health span, which is really about the sort of maximization of your health during your time alive. And a recognition that most people die prematurely from a disease process which is likely preventable years, decades in advance. And certainly that's where AI comes in, is that kind of predictive ability. And so in keeping somebody healthier, by its very nature, they will stay alive for longer. And then the next question is, how long could someone, reasonably stay alive based on our current genetics? And somewhere that right now is around 120, but there's certainly speculation that could be increased to 150 without, in very short order. And so I think that those are the areas. It's about keeping people alive at a healthy state, and also for longer. The further concept of extending lifespan past what is currently reasonable, and having an indefinite or immortal life, certainly that concept exists. And there is an idea within the longevity space called the longevity escape velocity. And escape velocity for aerospace, as I'm sure you know, is escaping gravity by accelerating away from Earth at the same pace that you're accelerating towards it. And the same thing holds true in longevity. Can we reverse somebody's aging at the same pace that time is passing, or perhaps even reverse it more quickly? And there are certainly people who believe that this is possible, and that we will see that in our lifetime. And it has been said, there's a hypothesis in the space that says that the person who will live an immortal life and be able to live to 1,000 is going to be born 10 years after the person who can live to 150. And that of course relates to the pace of the advancement of technology.
All right, so one question before we get onto AI specifically, and that is this a big area of research? Could you put some numbers on that?
Yes, I mean the research pool is growing, and honestly, it's a hard thing to put numbers on because there are so many different facets of longevity. But at this point, I've seen a couple of raises that are in the billions for individual projects, and so knowing that that's the case, the overall capex for longevity globally speaking, I don't know that I could estimate that now. It's so large. I mean, I'll be attending a conference in December at the Buck Institute of Aging Research in California, just north of San Francisco, and this is a research center which has been built completely around longevity, and that's its entire focus. And it's not alone. There are lots of places similar to this around the world.
I'd like to think that's full of professors in their 60s who look like they're straight out of the Baywatch set. Is that how those conferences go?
Yeah, as conferences go, I would say everybody looks healthy. Of the various conferences that I've attended, I can tell you that the conferences in longevity all have healthy food, and most of them don't serve alcohol.
Okay, right. Let's talk about AI. So could you summarize what AI approaches are in longevity research?
So, I think the best way of thinking of AI and longevity research is sort of the various targets or places that you could affect aging. And I think that the first area is sort of the data intake. It's the biomarkers of aging. In order to solve a problem, you first need to measure it. And at this point, there are lots of tests that are available that can, look at how old someone is from a biologic point of view. And those include genetic tests or levels of proteins, simple blood work, things that you might get done by your own general practitioner. Each one of these biomarkers gives a little bit of information, and the role that AI has in that ultimately really it's the first off identification of new markers that we would have never thought of, genes that are particularly related to our aging, proteins that decline with age, things that we would never have looked at but can be looked at with the support of AI. And moreover, the integration of all that information, because there's not any one single test that can really tell you how you're doing. It really needs to be a collection of data, and that data would look at you from the level of your entire system to each organ, to even specific cellular functions and mitochondria functions within your cells. So AI is really vital because, of course, the data, there are so many different sources and types of data, and they impact a human organism on so many levels. And then, of course, they extend even past the individual organism to a social or collective level of data. And so, I think the first way that AI will be used is in the identification of these biomarkers, and also the integration of that information to really give us a measure of how well we're doing. So that data, I think, is the first thing.
So are you looking? And we kind of touched on this before, but you're looking, I think, at aging as being a kind of fundamental process that affects all different systems in the body, rather than a system of degeneration that affects things in a kind of independent way. Am I right?
Yeah, you know what, you're absolutely right, and it's the I think the most important thing that has become very clear to me during my education and my experience in practice and in this space, it is quite simply the interconnectedness of all things. There is not one thing that works in your body that is not in some way connected to other parts of your body. Every single function is tied to all the others. So you can't affect one thing without affecting other things. And what that means from a high level is quite simply the only way to really understand it is to take it all in as a whole, and make it the sum of all of those components. And a human individual, of course, could never conceive of that level of data. And so I think that's really a vital role for AI in longevity, is, quite simply understanding humans and how we work, and that allows us to measure how we're doing, and also come up with targets as far as where things can be targeted towards our aging.
So let's think about some very specific cases. Could you just take us through a couple of those, please, Cory?
Sure. So there's a company called In Silico Medicine, and In Silico Medicine is a company which has a full pipeline from start to finish. They are looking at various biomarkers, identifying out of a collection of thousands of potential proteins and other fats and glycated molecules, all different things in the body that can be measured, and then comparing that to actual human data, and coming up with targets of proteins and peptides that might actually be able to affect mechanisms of aging, and then testing those within their AI models and coming up with predictive algorithms for how to bring those to clinical trials, and then also tracking the outcomes through clinical trials to then bring in the data in terms of how are patients doing within that those studies, and then to fruition. So it is a start to finish single solution on identifying targets, coming up with ways of affecting those targets, and then actually getting that into clinical studies. And so that full from start to finish is a really elegant way of giving us new methods of treating aging.
So when people in longevity research usually talk about the subject, they usually talk about it in terms of what you said before: eating healthily, getting exercise, being social, that kind of stuff. But what you're talking about now is the development of kind of like a pill, for long life. And obviously a lot of people will be thinking to themselves, well, that's great. I won't. That sounds very, very simple. It sounds almost too good to be true. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, honestly, it does seem too good to be true, but that's really where the R&D is going in this space. It's identifying these ways that we can manipulate, and there's a lot of good information that comes out from that, because of course that gives us the ability to track specific diseases and treat specific diseases, predict for them, and so this dimension of research and development in longevity, I think, is very active. But to your point, there is another very active space which is really much more about the end user. It's about the individual and their behaviors, and there are certainly lots of tools that are being developed that can actually track and modify those things as well.
If we just think about Ozempic now, increasing body weight is one of the hallmarks of aging. Is that a fair statement to make?
I would. It's interesting. I would almost flip it around. I would say that rather being a hallmark of aging, I would say increasing body weight is a cause of aging. And it affects your metabolism and ability to handle glucose. Fat is an endocrine organ. It produces hormones. And so weight gain over time actually ages you, rather than it's a part of aging naturally.
Now, when Ozempic was being talked about with a certain degree of hysteria, I have to say, probably about 2 months ago now, people were, in the news at least, were talking about it as a kind of anti-aging drug. Can you unpack that a little?
Yeah. So for those listening, Ozempic is a peptide. It's a glucagon-like peptide, GLP-1. And as a peptide, it is a series of amino acids. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are those, collection of amino acids that in sequence in various orders, that's what makes up a protein. But if it's less than 50 amino acids long, that's what a peptide is. So that's what Ozempic is. It's a peptide, the glucagon-like peptide, GLP. And it's a way of mimicking another molecule called glucagon. And so this actually helps to moderate how our body handles sugar. So when someone takes Ozempic, it modifies the handling of sugar, and so less of it is getting stored in your body, and this is one of the means that it helps to change your weight. And so the key to think about it is that in the end, it's not necessarily just the Ozempic that has that longevity benefit. It's the sugar handling that has the benefit. And the sugar handling and sugar is probably one of the most important determinants in longevity, and that harkens back to your healthy diet. One of the things that has been shown universally to extend life in all species is a calorie restricted diet. So quite simply taking in a low amount of calories. So sugars are really toxic for you. Any kind of sugar, it doesn't matter whether it's glucose in a soda pop or it's fructose in a fruit. All modes of sugars are harmful to humans, and it actually induces aging. And so Ozempic, one of the things it does on top of helping someone to lose weight is it helps you to handle your sugar, your glucose, in your blood, and therefore it can help you to live longer. So the real question, of course, is would you want to be on Ozempic for a lifetime, because there are certainly negative consequences to that, or would you be better off just monitoring your diet and minimizing your sugar intake? And you can imagine I asked the question, but it's partially because I know that the answer is really it's better off to take care of those things yourself rather than depending on the substances.
Now, going back to clinical trials for anti-aging drugs, do you have any ones to watch out for that might prove to be breakthroughs in that kind of space?
Yeah, there are a few that have shown really positive promise. I have to, the most important one I would reference is something called rapamycin. And rapamycin is now well established in multiple species to extend longevity, to actually extend lifespan. And rapamycin in general has been used as an oncology, a cancer treatment. But at lower doses, it actually extends life. And it has a specific genetic target, which actually is named for it, and that's mTOR, which is the mechanistic target of rapamycin. And this gene is actually targeted by the rapamycin, and it is related to all the hallmarks of aging, including your epigenetics and the telomeres, and so it actually reduces aging. So I would say that's the number one at this point. There are a handful of others that have shown good promise in a lot of different studies. Some controversy around something called metformin, which has been shown in some human studies even to extend life. And there are those who feel that the data is mixed, and at this point it's questioned. And then there are the other things like the GLP-1 and GLP-2, which are those glucagon-like peptides, which have been shown to have some benefit in longevity. And that, I would say the jury's still out as far as are the benefits that you get, better, or do they outweigh the consequences? So I would say that's still to be determined in those other ones.
Sure. Okay. So pharmaceuticals is one big area where AI can make a contribution in terms of longevity. But of course, machine learning AI is a very, very broad field. So can you think of are there any other areas in which AI can be applied to longevity research?
Yeah, I would say direct genetic manipulation, and we will come to the behavioral part of things and actual patient interaction, because I think we'll have a full conversation about that. But on the genetic side of things, it is possible to engineer genes, for example, there are these 4 transcription factors called Yamanaka factors, and so these are factors that have to do with how your DNA is converted into proteins, and research that came from Yamanaka, it won him and his colleague the Nobel Prize in 2012, and it allows you to actually take a cell and revert it back to its embryonic state. So what that means is, right now, any cell out of your body, we could take it, and whether it's a skin cell or it's one of your intestine cells, we could revert it back to being a stem cell as if it was in an embryo, and it's you. It has all of your DNA, fully formed and in perfect state. And so that was a really remarkable finding. But the question then is, how do you apply that? If I was to put something in you that reverted all of your cells to an embryonic state, you would die quickly. I mean, of course, that's not a recipe for life. Life is complex. We just discussed how, biological systems are so unbelievably complex and interrelated. So to really benefit from any kind of genetic reprogramming, there needs to be a management of those different factors in different cell types to understand or reach a point where you could dial that in and create a specific cell type. So let's say, for example, diabetes is a good example. Patients who have type 1 diabetes, that's juvenile diabetes, they are born without a particular type of cell in their pancreas. It's a beta island cell, and these beta islet cells, they're the things that produce insulin. Without them, you don't produce insulin, and that's why you have diabetes and you need to take injections of insulin. And again, this is not type 2 diabetes. This is not age-related diabetes. This is kids who are born with it. It is possible to engineer beta islet cells. I mean, it can be done. We don't know how to do it yet, but it could be done. And doing it is simply a question of how much do you modify each of those Yamanaka factors, and in what way, in order to rewire a cell that you take from a hair follicle, for example, or a skin biopsy, and how do you engineer a beta islet cell out of that? And so I think that is a very interesting area of research in AI and longevity. And there are companies that can actually synthesize genes to insert and alter cell function as well. So not rewiring the whole cell, but rather just sort of plugging in a new little program or a new component. So regenerative medicine and cell therapy or gene therapy, I think those are very promising, and those things are under development now.
Now that sounds like the kind of approach to aging where you consider it to be a kind of set of a large number of separate engineering problems that you can address, rather than addressing the kind of fundamental underlying cause of all different forms of aging. Is that fair to say?
Yep. Yeah, I think that's fair to say, and the space is broad, and everyone is approaching it from their own perspective, and that kind of multi-system engineering approach is certainly one. But to your point, the approach at looking at root cause and how to alter root cause is probably the long-term winning solution, and the way of preventing aging. Where the multi-systems engineering approach would be more of a, what do you do when things are already starting to go wrong and you have someone who's already started aging? Can you dial that back and then use those preventive kind of global root cause means to maintain them there?
Sure. Okay. So let me press you, Cory, for one more example of how AI has been applied to this field.
Sure. I think the one of the most exciting areas for me is using AI for patient analysis and actual patient interactions. And so there are companies that are producing AI platforms that will actually work with patients, individual people, and monitor them and give them a real-time advice on their current health status, and also recommendations on maintaining and improving it. So, for example, there is a company called Longevity AI out of Tel Aviv, Israel, which I think is really exciting. And they have brought together 1.6 million patient charts with data from 20 years. And as you know, Felix, it really is, it's about data. right? I mean, the more data you have, the more you can, actually put into, any kind of AI learning platform. And that amount of data for that amount of time is really remarkable. And so with that data, they've created a platform which is then fueled by around 1,500 scientific papers that have each individually been vetted and ranked according to their legitimacy and power. And putting an individual patient's information into that platform leverages those 20 years of data plus all the scientific publications, and is actually then able to give people real-time risk patterns. So, for example, it can predict your risk of getting Parkinson's disease. It can predict your risk of getting cardiovascular disease or having a heart attack in the next 10 years. And that's really powerful to give someone a dashboard where they can actually see their real-time health. That to me is really, really exciting, because that allows people to change their behavior and actually act on their current health, not just sort of waiting for something to break and then trying to go back and fix it.
That's fascinating. I mean, I can imagine at the same time it might be possible that kind of interface would stress you out so much you might start doubling your aging rate.
I'd like to think that it will make our phones into a tool for our own health. There are so many platforms, sales platforms and marketing platforms that are, gamifying what they offer, the public. And
Yeah.
in this instance, really, I'm hoping that we can gamify someone's health. Because what better thing could you possibly get someone addicted to than their own health and well-being? And I really see a future where people, on a regular basis will be checking on themselves and say, a month ago my risk of heart disease in 10 years was 93%. Now it's 85%, and all I had to do was eat some more vegetables and go to the gym a couple times. Maybe if I go to the gym a couple more times next month, I can reduce that more, and suddenly someone is actually in charge of their own health. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, and a very necessary thing in a world where our public healthcare systems are, universally under crisis with an aging population. These kinds of tools, I believe, will be the future of public healthcare, where it's really in the hands of the people and in the public.
Well, Cory, that leads me to my last question, and that is that there may be people out there listening who are thinking to themselves, well, on the one hand, this sounds amazing and wonderful, and on the other hand, it sounds very disturbing, and I can well imagine that the Jeff Bezoses and Elon Musks of the world might be truly living to 150, but the rest of us are not going to see much change. Do you have any concerns of those kind?
I think that it's a reasonable concern, and the way that the longevity market is launching right now is with those kinds of VIP patients. But it's a marketing tactic. As with most spaces, there needs to be someone who pays for the initiation. Who were the people who got the first mobile phones? Who were the people who bought the first automobiles? Those people paid a premium. And the rich people are paying massive premiums. They're paying huge sums of money to these clinics. But all of this is now funding a research environment which is bringing forward these tools that will be used for the general public. And one thing I can say that has impressed me greatly with the longevity community is that there is absolutely no doubt that there is a complete universal push towards democratizing these tools. Mm-hmm. It's about making it accessible to the general public, not about just providing it to the VIP. And so there's always a bias at the outset, but over time these tools are going to become more and more readily available to the common people. There's another software package that I'm a huge fan of called AI Nexus, and this is something that can actually use your phone camera to scan your face and come back not just with vital signs, but then at a second level of AI actually take that to risks of diseases, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Parkinson's, and that has actually been employed in Bangalore. It's now being used broadly and being used in more areas in India, and it's a physician extender. So, that is absolutely not about the VIP billionaire patient. That's just about people who don't have access to doctors now actually having medical assessments on a daily basis being sent to a physician dashboard. And that is the goal. That's where longevity medicine is going.
Cory, it's an absolutely fascinating area, and I'm very much obliged to you. It's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. We should have a follow-up discussion in 90 years' time and see where we are there. Everything might be very different. Thank you so much, Cory.
It is my pleasure, Felix. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Ping me on LinkedIn if you have any ideas on new subjects or guests.